and quite frankly, I won't call it a media organization, your group of individuals need to take accountability for some of the polarization that we're seeing in this country. And I think Canadians are cluing into the fact that there is a really important decision we take about the kind of country we want to see. And I salute all extraordinary, hardworking journalists that put science and facts at the heart of what they do and ask me tough questions every day, but make sure that they are educating and informing Canadians from a broad range of perspectives, which is the last thing that you guys do.
At the 2021 leadership debates, these folks had not just a magic circle firm retained to assist, but they actually had 2 years to prepare a more robust reasoning for excluding Rebel. And to be fair, they were pretty crafty in how they designed this criteria to try to exclude Rebel News and some other reporters, while not excluding obviously the favored media that got the automatic accreditation to cover the debates.
Tamara Ugolini here with Rebel News to reiterate that not all is lost on freedom of the press in Canada. As many of our Rebel viewers know, the Justin Trudeau Liberals tried to block our reporters from entering into the media scrum of the Debates Commission after Prime Minister Trudeau called a snap election in the middle of, I think it was the alleged 5th wave of coronavirus in the fall of 2021. He, of course, traveled all across the nation to campaign, while us little people were told to stay home and save lives. Nonetheless, for the second time in a row, Rebel lawyers went up against the parliamentary authoritarians, or rather their lawyers, and just like we did in 2019, we had another win. The Rebel journalists, myself included, were granted an emergency injunction to the debates, and Mr. Trudeau absolutely seethed at our questions. Here's a recap.
I have a question from Tamara Ugolini from Rebel News.
Mr. Trudeau, the only reason that I'm allowed to ask you this question is because today the federal court ruled that the government doesn't have the right to determine who is or is not a journalist. This is the second election in a row that the court had to overturn your government. Do you still insist on being able to make that decision, and why?
First of all, questions around accreditation were handled by the press gallery and the consortium of networks who have strong perspectives on quality journalism and the important information that is shared with Canadians. The reality is, organizations like yours that continue to spread misinformation and disinformation on the science around vaccines, around how we're going to actually get through this pandemic and be there for each other and keep our kids safe, is part of why we're seeing such unfortunate anger and lack of understanding of basic science. And quite frankly, I won't call it a media organization, your group of individuals need to take accountability for some of the polarization that we're seeing in this country. And I think Canadians are cluing into the fact that there is a really important decision we take about the kind of country we want to see. And I salute all extraordinary, hardworking journalists that put science and facts at the heart of what they do and ask me tough questions every day, but make sure that they are educating and informing Canadians from a broad range of perspectives, which is the last thing that you guys do.
Bonjour, Monsieur Trudeau, Alexa pour Rebel News. Donc, Monsieur Trudeau, je vais revenir rapidement sur ce qui s'est passé hier. Vous avez diabolisé l'un des rares médias qui ne reçoit pas d'argent du gouvernement. Vous avez exprimé votre opinion en disant que nous propageons la désinformation. Si c'était vrai et si c'était le cas, la Cour fédérale ne nous aurait pas permis d'être ici aujourd'hui. Je suis moi-même scientifique et je me base sur les faits. Ma question est la suivante. L'Israël est l'un des pays les plus vaccinés au monde. Ils sont rendus maintenant à leur 4e rappel de vaccin. Ils ne considèrent plus que ceux qui ont reçu 2 doses de vaccin sont pleinement vaccinés. Ma question est, plusieurs Canadiens ne désirent pas avoir un rappel de vaccin. Allez-vous leur enlever leurs privilèges reliés au vaccinal? Et aurez-vous l'obligeance de répondre à ma question en tant que Premier ministre ou allez-vous encore diaboliser mon média?
J'ai partagé ma perspective sur ton organisation hier soir. J'ai plus rien à dire.
Ça demande bien qui vous êtes. Merci.
He basically just projected a bunch of his own unfortunate pandemic mishandlings onto me and my group of individuals. He didn't answer the questions, of course, that's normal for Prime Minister Trudeau. So now that the judge has formally published the reasons for her ruling, I wanted to catch up with one of the lawyers who worked on this case, the very same guy who took on the government, Chad Williamson. Check it out.
I mean, we're always on standby, obviously working with Rebel and civil liberties initiatives like the Democracy Fund to kind of jump in a lightning pinch on cases of importance or that are kind of emergent and alarming, right? So it takes a degree of I should say a willingness to not have a life and lose your free time to jump into these types of files. We got the call essentially 6 days prior to the actual leadership debates, of which there was both the French language and the English language the very next week. We got kind of a call very late in the evening, and not because the client retained us, at the last minute. It was because the Leadership Debates Commission probably wanted to make sure that Rebel wouldn't be able to mobilize a legal response to their exclusion from the leadership debates. And this is a tactic that the Leadership Debates Commission has employed now for 2 debates in a row. And we anticipate them employing similar strategies in the future. And what that entails for any of the lawyers that get brought on is that they essentially have to review a tremendous amount of documents and then formulate an adequate response and then draft their own pleadings. What most people saw when we challenged the debate at the hearing, which was actually televised. Surprisingly, the court gave us permission to expand the Zoom capabilities to allow, I think, up to 2,500 people to actually watch the proceedings, which is fairly unprecedented. Unlike in the States, where a lot of these court proceedings are televised, in Canada, we're still somewhat traditional in the sense that while you can go to court, you still can't video record a lot of the proceedings and then publish it later. So it was very interesting that the court allowed this to be televised, probably because of its significant public importance concerning freedom of speech and freedom of the press. But essentially, that wasn't the only bit. So it was, a fantastic performance. There was about a 3-hour, 4-hour hearing. Most of that time, of course, being taken up by the peculiar arguments and the trying to fit the circle through the square that the Leadership Debates Commissions had kind of attempted in their assault on Rebel. Our submissions were actually really quite short. And the reason for that being is that we did a tremendous amount of emergency work on the very front end, preparing significant, fairly substantial affidavits, a massive record, and actually a very, very robust legal brief as well, upon which I believe the judge in that case lent more credence probably to the written materials than the actual submissions themselves. So there's a lot of work that went into it, a lot of lawyering. It's kind of funny because people see on legal dramas, they'll see a lawyer get up on the soapbox and make a great speech and then, of course, carry the day and win the case. Law's obviously not nearly as romantic as that. It's not an episode of Suits. It's a lot of sitting in front of a computer screen at 4:30 in the morning wanting to fight your colleagues because you're sleep deprived and you're trying to get documents drafted in with a degree of haste, right? So it was pretty interesting.
And that speaks volumes to the fact that I think there was 2 lawyers on this one case up against 7 parliamentary lawyers as well. What was that like for you?
I'm so proud of the work, not only of I'm tremendously proud of the client. I mean, Rebel News is one of the only organizations that really kind of puts their body weight behind what they say, especially when it comes to freedom of the press, freedom of association, freedom of religion, freedom of speech is obviously a big one. And kind of the tenets that make liberal democracies such bastions of civilization in the modern world. But I'm also tremendously proud that a small homegrown family reasonable rate firm from Calgary, Alberta, in the depths of the Calgary Beltline. We're not in a massive office tower made of glass with $50,000 pieces of art hanging on the wall. This business was started out of my apartment. And at the last minute, when I got the call to respond to this case and to prosecute an application to allow Rebel to attend the leadership debates, it was just a tremendous amount of work. I had to call one of my really good friends. At this time, I didn't even have staff that I could lean on. I called a really good friend who I retained as agent counsel, who I've known for 15 years prior to becoming a lawyer. And this was on the Labor Day weekend as well, which was another big problem because I had a 5-day vacation booked off. And when I got the call, I was thinking, oh man, I'm going to have to give up my vacation. But this case was just too important for us not to pass up. And I was just, I'm just humbled that when I, phoned a buddy who also had a really big vacation planned, that he sacrificed his weekend to come in and fight such an important battle. And of course, just recruiting him was just the first step in a very arduous weekend. I think on the Saturday alone, Tamara, we worked 18 hours. I remember our brief and materials were due, I believe, at noon on Sunday or something. I'm kind of going back in time here. I don't really remember the deadlines, but we stayed in the office until I think like 4 o'clock or 4:30 in the morning on Saturday. And we started at 8 o'clock that morning just to get these materials prepared. And one thing I know that I'm getting into the nitty gritty of how we actually drafted this, but we were using Google Docs, which actually allows multiple users to draft on the same document. And it was really interesting to see this new technology employed in a way to, kind of give us the power to take on what normally a massive law firm would have to do. And to see my colleague Martin Raymond typing one paragraph when I was typing on the paragraph above, and we were swapping out back and forth. It was really something to see. And of course, I don't want to pat myself on the back too hard, but frankly, a little family-run firm in Alberta up against one of the top 5 magic circle firms out in Toronto, hired by the government with unlimited access to an open public purse, kind of the big bad oppressive government that's spending taxpayer money to silence journalists. At the 2021 leadership debates, these folks had not just a magic circle firm retained to assist, but they actually had 2 years to prepare a more robust reasoning for excluding Rebel. And to be fair, they were pretty crafty in how they designed this criteria to try to exclude Rebel News and some other reporters, while not excluding obviously the favored media that got the automatic accreditation to cover the debates, right? So they'd had some prep time. And frankly, when we took this case, our optimism was tremendously guarded. They'd had time to prepare. So we didn't come into this thinking, especially Marty and I, we didn't come into this thinking that, we were just going to spend a weekend working and come out with a surefire victory and we'd be able to, wave the banner of liberty and celebration of, a job well done and, charter rights and all that sort of stuff. This was a very precarious fight. The judge was very, very down to earth and reasonable. And quite honestly, I think that it just took a seasoned legal mind, but also just some common sense to see through the thinly veiled nonsense, frankly, that the government had come up with to try to distinguish Rebel and these other, persona non grata journalists from the media party, which was very refreshing to see, because throughout, this period of COVID, government oppression, and throughout this period of where we've got a federal government that's looking to censor people online and control speech, compel people to say things, as we've even seen from some decisions here in Alberta, compelling speech from the Pavlovskis and Chris Scott during those contempt proceedings. In an era where we're seeing more and more infringements and more serious infringements on civil liberties, it was so refreshing to see a judge give, quite frankly, a very basic and simple and correct decision in this case. And the judge there's no BS. That's what I loved, is this really was BS versus no BS. And for once in, once in a blue moon, no BS actually wins, and we pulled a great card with a fantastic justice. I think that the government lawyers did a great job of digging themselves even more into a hole during the proceedings. It was fascinating for me to watch them scramble when challenged by some, fairly common sense comments and questions that came from the judge. Really, after we prepared all those written submissions, I just got to give a fantastic speech about freedom, liberty, and the freedom of expression. And then I kind of got to watch the government lawyers dig themselves more and more into a hole. And obviously, we've got the outcome that we got. Well, this was a significant and profound victory for civil rights, freedom of speech, and freedom of the press, which has been in a clandestine way, almost swept under the rug. I mean, it looks like we've got all this competition out there. We've got, dozens of news organizations. Really, they're mostly being funded by the federal government, and they're owned by very few companies. So what looks to be this wonderful free market of ideas, really, it's not. And despite winning a small battle, we're still in the middle of what I would consider to be an intellectual war in respect of the national dialogue that occurs in this country. So is this, the end? Definitely not. This might just be the end of the beginning. We still have a significant war to fight. We anticipate further attempts by the federal government and by these, administrative government bodies to oppress freedom of speech, to censor people, to silence voices that they don't agree with. And I think there's going to be a tremendous amount of work left to do. I would not be surprised if at the next federal leadership debate, they've crafted some new harebrained criteria to try to exclude the journalists that they don't like. So this is a big win. And what I tell people, because Tamara, everyone gets so down on what this country has gone through over the last, 2 to 5 years. We really do need to at least take some time to celebrate these victories, when in the grand scheme of things, again, we haven't won the war, but these are significant victories, and people need to give themselves a little bit more of a pat on the back for standing up to the big bad and the ugly. So what's going to happen in the future? I suppose you're probably in a better position than me to, answer that question. But frankly, freedom-loving people, I think, will be there to stand with shields at the ready to continue to defend against this onslaught from the forces of old and the forces of evil.
Chad makes it clear, and we all know that the fight against authoritarian rule in Canada is not over. But an honest, unbiased judge saw the Debates Commission and its arbitrary creation of a two-tiered accreditation process for what it was: unreasonable, procedurally unfair, and lacking in discernible rationality and logic. Justice Heneghan further explained that there is room in the nation for the expression of opposing points of view, and that Rebel News did not ask to impose its views, but for the opportunity to participate in coverage of matters of importance during a federal election. For Rebel News, I'm Tamara Ugolini. Thanks to your generous donations, we were able to act swiftly and hire on this lawyer right before a long weekend with almost next to no notice. To help offset the costs associated with this legal battle, please consider donating at letusreport.ca. The whole thing would not have been possible without your generosity. If you appreciate the work that we do and the coverage that we provide and our continued efforts to hold the government to account, then please consider chipping in if you're able at that special website again, letusreport.ca.